All right, Kirsten Copely, welcome to the Heart Dealer podcast. How are you today?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm great. How are you?
I'm also great. You're in New York, is that correct?
I am, yes.
Do you guys have snow already or not yet?
Oh no, it was 55 degrees yesterday and it rained. So we're actually having an unseasonably warm couple of days here. Not
We've
complaining,
got
not complaining.
me neither. We have gray and wet in Vancouver, but I was chatting with someone yesterday in Montreal and they were like, we got snow everywhere. So I figured
Oh
I'd ask.
wow. Yeah,
I
well,
want,
yeah, go ahead.
no, after you, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it's not uncommon for us to have snow this time of year, but I think with all the weather patterns changing the way they have been, you can throw it into the air and decide what's gonna happen, you just don't know, so
Yeah, I mean, the job of weatherman is either getting harder or easier. I don't know which it is, but you show
Exactly,
up for work and
exactly.
it's just going either way. So what I think want to start with, because this is I guess most unique to you of all my guests so far, is just the harp. I mean, like, I have a million harp questions. I love Guinness, so for me the harp is associated with Guinness. But like,
Fair enough.
how does one like decide at a young age that it's the harp of all instruments?
Well, that's a great question, and, it's actually, really easy to answer. My mother was a musician. She was very, very interested in unique and unusual instruments. I grew up in a family where we had in a house that had, marimba, ukulele, lots of different, types of instruments, and I had already started playing piano when I was 2. So I, was already musically inclined, had a curiosity towards music and instruments. And my mother found an ad in our local paper. I grew up outside of Detroit, Michigan, in Bloomfield Hills, a suburb of Detroit. And she found an ad in the paper for a small troubadour harp, which is actually considered, it's a lever instrument instead of a pedal harp. And I can explain the difference between that later in the conversation if you'd like. But it was more suited for a student and a smaller instrument. And she brought it home really for her own enjoyment and expected to use it within her own, extracurricular activities. And she thought that it would be a good fit for her. But her 5-year-old decided to sit down behind it. And that was when I decided that, it was actually my harp instead of hers. So I started playing around with it, and she realized, very quickly that I needed to take lessons, and so she found me a teacher locally in Detroit that had played with the Detroit Symphony and was well known in the area, and I started, studying with her, and that's how I began my journey.
That's amazing. I mean, the harp is just such a unique instrument. It's not something that people necessarily think of when someone says, I'm a musician, right? You think of maybe more of your classical, your guitar, drums, violin, saxophone. Um, I know nothing about the harp. And going into your music, I had all these expectations which were completely shattered, and we'll talk about that later as well. But like, what's it like gigging with a harp? I mean, do you have a guy that pushes this thing around? Do you have to like, how do you even tour with a harp? How do you buy strings for a harp? I need to know everything.
Okay, let's start at the beginning. How do I get around? I live in Brooklyn now, so I have a car and I drive myself, and I put it in the back of my Subaru out back, and I drive myself wherever I need to go for my gig and unload it, and it's I've been doing it for so long that it's like secondhand now, right? But when I lived in Manhattan, and I did that for 18 years before we, left for Brooklyn, I had a driver, and he would literally pick me up. And I didn't have a car when I lived in Manhattan. There's no real reason to have a car when you live in Manhattan, and I just felt like it was a lot easier for him to pick me up and take me to my gigs, and it worked out really, really well. I don't really tour with it per se. I had a very bad experience when I flew to Israel, excuse me, a number of years ago. And it was put in its case that that you purchase with it. It's a hard shell case, and it very clearly states no forklift on the side of it in multiple places. And of course, they used a forklift and they dropped it and it was damaged, and I was without it for several months. So now when I have to play out of town or when I'm on a short tour, like I had this past summer in the South with Symphony of the Americas, I felt like it was just better to rent an instrument. And usually I have a pretty big network of harpists throughout the United States that I can rely on. But in that particular case, they actually found a store that was located in Tennessee where we were starting the tour. And it was just, amazing because I got to just show up and play on that instrument and not have to worry about it. And that's the case, if I'm playing internationally as well. So
You rely on your network to make sure that there's a harp to wherever you're going. I mean, how I know how big they are, but how heavy are these things? How hard is it to actually you said you throw it in your Subaru and walk around. I mean, I feel like this thing's 300 pounds.
no, it's about 80. And it's actually not that heavy in terms of pounds, but it is unequal in its distribution of weight. And so there are long metal rods that go up the column of the harp, and that is where the majority of the weight resides because of those heavy metal rods. And it tends to be a
Mm.
little top heavy because of that. You never want to have it just sitting unmanned if you're outside during a very windy day because it can blow over, and and I've known people who have had that happen to their instruments. So, there are precautions that you certainly need to take, and I don't pretend to joke that I throw it in the car. It's more of a lay down and lift and push it into the back of the car. but,
Yeah,
but
fair.
again, it has a dolly that it rolls on, so I can walk down the street with the bench on top of it with my bag on my shoulder and actually have parked my car a couple blocks away and wheel it to the gig. And I get a lot of stares, of people as I wheel by them in the city. but, but it's sometimes the most effective way of doing it.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds logical. It sounds like it's efficient. And to any giggers out there that are like, I'm not gonna do a load in, this guitar amp or head is too hard, the cab. This lady is pushing around an 80-pound harp. You can deal with it, so suck it up. Is your harp is it electric or acoustic, so to speak? Are there different variants to a harp, or is it all the same?
Sure, that's a great question. Actually, mine is an acoustic instrument. I have a wonderful relationship with Schertler, and they are manufacturers of one of the best acoustic pickups that you can have for the harp. And so it's a contact pickup. You put it on the sounding board, and it has phantom power, and it's beautiful. It sounds beautiful. I personally feel that it sounds better than drilling a hole into my instrument and putting one of the pickups that they sell for harps to be installed in it all the time. I feel like the sound is not as good as this contact pickup is.
Fair. So does that mean when you play, I mean, it's obviously a large instrument. It's probably loud and puts out a nice sound. Do you still have to mic it when you're performing in an auditorium?
It depends on the situation. I mean, a lot of times I've been asked to bring a small amp with me for certain gigs if there are going to be, let's say, 200 or 300 people in the room. Um, or if you have a noisy cocktail reception where people are talking loudly. The instrument carries, but I wouldn't say it's particularly a loud instrument. I think one of the common phrases that we hear in an orchestra rehearsal is harp, more harp. We need to hear the harp. So that's an acoustic situation where we might be drowned out by the percussion and the brass, and we have to maybe play a little louder in order for a section to be heard. But I think there are just various rules, let's say, as to when I'm amplified and when I'm not.
I wouldn't be a dad if I didn't make the occasional dad joke. Have you considered a t-shirt that says more cowbell and has it crossed out and underneath it says more harp?
I think I can look into that. That's a great idea.
What about the strings? Like, these things are massive. Do you have to do the entire set, or do you do one string at a time? Is it just as easy as doing a guitar only on a larger scale? Tell me a bit about that.
Um, it's, I guess, similar to stringing a guitar. It has a peg that it is woven through. I have to always have an entire set in my bag because you don't ever know which one's going to break or when you're going to need, the second octave E in certain situations or whatever. So I always carry a full set with me when I'm on a gig, just in case something breaks. The harp is very particular about weather. The strings hate the humidity, the wood loves it. So in the summertime, the wood's really happy, the strings are not so much. In the winter, the wood constricts and the strings are happier. So, you know, so we humidify the house during the winter months and we dehumidify the house during the summer months. So it's a constant battle to keep it at a consistent I like to say that the harp is happy when you're comfortable, meaning that,
Mhm.
below 55 degrees, it's not really that happy. Neither am I if I'm not wearing a winter coat outside, right? And same thing goes for hot weather. It can't be in direct sunlight. Direct sunlight will start to melt the center strip, the glue that attaches the center strip. So I have very specific rules and regulations for what I require if I'm playing an outdoor gig, because those elements really do affect the instrument quite a lot. But going back to your question about stringing the harp, normally we don't. First of all, you never take all the strings off at once because there's 2,000 pounds of pressure on this instrument based on the tension that is coming from the 47
Crazy.
strings into the mechanisms. So it's a very intense instrument in that sense. And usually if I'm having the harp regulated, which means that it's getting adjusted, there are a lot of mechanisms that need to be, maybe turned a 16th of an inch or an eighth of an inch just to rotate so that it's in tune between flat, natural, and sharp. And that's where the pedals come in. So on a concert grand harp, you have pedals, 7 pedals on the bottom, and each one is correlating with that particular note. So there's one for every note of the 7 notes in a scale. So the scale is, from the root to the octave, and so all 7 notes in between that have a pedal that corresponds to that. And there are 3 notches from flat to natural to sharp for each string.
I know that you taught this, so I I can see that there's a wealth of education around this instrument in particular. I had on, I don't know, a couple months ago, a gentleman named Ben Wright. He's a founder and co-vocalist of Henhouse Prowlers, bluegrass type band, and he
Mhm.
plays banjo. And I was blown away by how expensive banjos can be. I had no idea. What is a harp price point? I mean, how does one go into a store and acquire a harp?
I usually answer that with it's about the same as your mid-range, mid-sized vehicle.
Wow.
So, it depends on how ornate they are. The more ornate, the more expensive. If they're gilded with gold, more expensive. So there's a varying range. Mine are what I would consider to be a very nice mid-sized car. Yeah.
That's incredible. So I mean, no wonder. I mean, an instrument getting damaged by someone else's hand is never a good thing. But no wonder it's especially painful when it's the cost of a mid-sized car, and then I'm assuming that the repairs are also going to be expensive. Let's take a step back because I love how we started. And you said it was like a mini harp, and immediately what I was picturing was like the classic image of a cherub in the sky, and they're playing a tiny little harp. Is that the harp you were playing? Or
No,
Fisher
no,
Price?
no. No, this one still sits on the floor. The harps that you're talking about are more like a lyre, Lyre, right? And that's kind of the same instrument, the Irish harp, right, that you see on the Guinness symbol, and, and some of the more, I would call them lap harps. Those are very different from the harps that I play. So my instruments, like right now, I own two concert grand harps. Those are the ones that you see in the back of an orchestra or front center stage in a recital setting. And then I have a Celtic instrument that's 36 strings instead of 47. That's much closer to the instrument that I started on than the one that I play now, full time, I should say.
This is a
Does
random
that make
question.
sense?
Yeah, yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. I don't know why I randomly thought of this, but you mentioned the strings, right? There's 36 versus 47, was it?
Hmm.
Is the pound, like the tension on the one with less strings lower than the one with more strings, or are they tuned where the tension's the same?
No, I mean, they're tuned so the tension is the same, but because it's a smaller instrument and there are lesser strings, there's less pressure for sure. That instrument has a very different tone quality too. So
Yeah.
there's different timbres to the instruments. And that's something that I think is really interesting because I'll get called. I was just recently called to play on an album for Sting, and they didn't want the regular harp. They wanted the Celtic harp, and it was for a very specific purpose, and that's all I can say about it, but it definitely there are settings and reasons why that other instrument, that smaller instrument, really does come, into play and has a really beautiful warm sound, but very different from the tone that you have for the concert grand instrument.
That makes sense. Where I want to go with this conversation is there's like spirituality and mindset, and also like this very modernist approach to what you're doing, which is phenomenal. And I've listened to about half of the latest album, and it's exceptional. But I want to like really understand that arc, because I'm assuming that at 5 you didn't think, oh man, I'm gonna have Grammy awards and be on stage with Beyonce. You're probably focused more on classical training and classical music. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's very accurate. Absolutely. I was a competitive harpist. I won awards in international competitions when I was growing up. And I went to college for harp performance. So I have 2 degrees as a harp performance major from Indiana University, Bloomington. And that's really where my focus was when I was growing up. But I always had an interest in pop music. I listened to pop music. I definitely had um, interest and curiosity for more than just classical music. So I was interested in world music. I was interested in reggae music. I was interested in all sorts of different types of music, probably from my mom because she did a lot of research in ethnomusicology. She had many hours towards a doctorate in ethnomusicology. So I think that was part of my upbringing that sort of carried over into how I became interested in playing pop music or playing other styles of music like new age. So I think where I started branching off was when I had to realize how to make a living moving to New York City and realizing that that classical background was awesome to have, and it set me up for a lot of opportunities and success in the classical arena, but it also gave me the opportunity to also go for that more pop based style. And I was very fortunate to have a steady gig in the city for over 25 years that was at the St. Regis Hotel on Fifth Avenue playing for afternoon tea. And it was a gift because I could go for a couple of hours each afternoon and play whatever I wanted. And that could mean that I was playing, Lady Gaga and then Bach, you know. So it was an awesome place to be able to work on some of the new arrangements that I had been doing, and also just being able to sit back and enjoy playing some more popular repertoire.
Yeah, it seems like it's one of those instruments similar to a piano where you can kind of transcend genres. You can get into a public forum and play, like you said, Bach or Beethoven and Jay-Z and Nirvana all in the same thing because you're doing the melodies and people will latch onto it. You mentioned family, you mentioned your mother. Yes, you found this instrument at 5 and you fell in love with it and you were getting lessons and whatnot, but what are some of the things that you owe to your, endurance? A lot of people will pick up instruments and drop off, or they'll hit certain peaks, milestones, and drop off, but you're still doing this. Talk to me a bit about, not only your passion for this, but the values that were instilled in you to continue to pursue this, because it's not always easy when you're doing something like pursuing music.
Sure. Yeah, I think my mom was actually she was my biggest champion, and she never missed a single recital. She never missed an opportunity that she would, try to pass to me. Um I feel that one of the benefits of the way that she raised me was to also expose me to as many different cultures, as many different extracurricular activities. I took ballet, I took dance, I took swimming lessons, I played tennis. I mean, there were lots of things that she introduced me to and tried to make me as well rounded as she possibly could. And I think that was one of the things that really helped me as I blossomed into, teenage years where I started getting a little sick of the harp and I took a year off and decided to be a cheerleader instead. I mean, there were definitely my road was not straight. You know? There were definitely times when I wasn't really sure what I was going to do. But I always knew that I would end up in music. It was the only thing that I was passionate about that I knew I was really good at. And I think, not all kids go to college knowing what they're going to do in their first year, and I knew. So I didn't go to school as a harp major, but I was in the music school. And I realized about, halfway through my sophomore year that I was really not in the right department and that I really belonged in the harp department. And the reason that I had actually gone to Indiana University is because the professor there, Suzanne McDonald, who's one of the preeminent harpists in the entire world and recently passed away, who was also my mentor since I'd been 11, taught there. And I think deep down, I knew that that's where I needed to be because I'd end up in her studio again. And that's exactly what happened. And I felt really, really good about my college experience too, because I was back with my tutor who had mentored me for, many years at that point. But I was also part of a group called Singing Hoosiers, which is the show choir at Indiana University that tours. And that was a really good outlet for me, again, to be a part of something that was more popular and not as classical. So I always had this balance and this yin yang with the classical and the popular worlds. And I think that really opened me up to the opportunities that then came to me when I moved to New York City.
Yeah, that makes sense. It sounds like you had a really good grounding, a really good base from a young age. I mean, you mentioned it. Not most people go into university not knowing what they want to do. I'm a great example of that. I had no idea. I think I changed majors 4 times, and I took time off and then came back and did it part time and goofed around. My parents said, "We don't care what you do. You need to finish university because it's not about having a major. It's about having the ability to." Um, set to do something and complete it. You need to learn how to stick with something and complete it, and that for me, that was
Yeah.
the big takeaway and lesson. So you're blessed that you knew what you wanted to do and you followed that path, and like I said, you had a good base there. How does that continue in life? So I don't wanna go through your whole history because we would be here for 3 hours. Grammy nominations, performed for Obama. You've shared the stage with, as I mentioned earlier, Beyoncé and many, many other artists. You, had some, solo recitals when you were younger at Carnegie Hall. How does one, in all of that success and in what the industry is, as we know it can be, how does one stay humble? How does one retain their grounding?
Mm. Well, I think that's knowing thyself and never getting bigger than you can fit into your britches, so to speak, right? My mother always taught me to be very humble and never brag about my accolades, and I was fortunate to have many accolades, but I wasn't tooting my own horn a lot. So I feel grateful for the experiences that I've had in New York. You mentioned, yes, I had solo recitals at Carnegie, three separate solo recitals at Carnegie Hall. I've been a concerto soloist in the main Stern Auditorium. I've been a soloist at Lincoln Center. But in 2005 is when the doors opened for me to start playing with the hip hop world. And that was an incredible period and era of my life, because the first gig that I played was at Live 8, which was the 10-year anniversary of Live Aid. And we played in Philadelphia on the steps of the Philadelphia Art Museum with Kanye West, who at the time had just come out with a great album that was very popular. And then I did a series of work with him, moved to Jay-Z, moved to Beyonce, and there we are. We're off and running. And a lot of those subsequent artists that I played with came from that early hip hop experience and the people that I was working with on those shows. So that was a very exciting time, and it's not over. I still play with artists, so I shouldn't say that it's in the past. But it did start quite a long time ago, and I think it's one of the things I've been most grateful for, specifically about my time in New York, is that those things came to me because I was here. Um, I think the Grammy nominations are a very humbling experience. You're honored by your peers. They're the ones that are voting for you, and they're the ones who are supporting you in your journey from, the inception of your record to when the nominations are announced to the awards. And so I'm just very grateful for and thankful for the community that we have within the various chapters of the Recording Academy. The New York chapter is very tight. I consider a lot of the New York chapter members my friends. And it's an amazing feeling to be able to not only be with them in a musical realm, but also be able to get together for teas and coffee time and cocktails or whatever. So we're blessed, I think, with the community that we have with the academy. And I think because those friendships are so strong, we're able to really support each other as human beings, not just in the musical world. And I really appreciate that.
Yeah. I think that there's like a theme that's developing, and these conversations for me are about obviously getting to know someone, understanding their story, their history, finding like lessons along the way. Authenticity is the thing that comes up all the time. You referenced Shakespeare by proxy, right? To thine own self be true. It's so important to stick with yourself, your true self, your beliefs. And when you pair that with an instrument that transcends genres, then you get these incredible opportunities, like you mentioned, Sting earlier, or working with rappers, hip hop artists, whatever it is. Do you have like an ultimate vision or goal where your career goes, or is this like to manifest the end, so to speak, or are you just taking it day by day? Let me know.
Oh my goodness. Well, I think when people ask me what my very favorite gig has been, it's super difficult to answer that because there have been so many experiences that qualify for like the gig of life, right? But I think what's already happened and what I think is the pinnacle for an actual opportunity was playing with Beyonce at the White House for Barack Obama. And for the second state, it was the second state dinner at the White House during his first term. So that was an incredibly exciting, incredibly memorable experience, and one that I feel like I can't really top per se. If you're talking about a gig. As far as my compositional career and my new age music is concerned, I would really like to see it reach a wider audience that would bring my themes into play. And this particular album, Kuruvinda, the theme of it is we are all imperfect gems. And it's born from the recognition and the work that I've personally done on myself to accept the flaws that I have and to recognize the flaws that I have, but not see them as ugly or something that makes me less than, but rather seeing them as facets of light and seeing them as uh, the overall picture of who I am. And that's not to say that I am perfect in any way, shape, or form, right? We're all imperfect. So I think that would be something, if I could have my music in places where there's a wellness or a psychology component, where my music would be the backdrop and the catalyst for people to experience something within themselves that would help them grow or would help them manifest, help them realize something about themselves that would be monumental in their world.
That's amazing, and you're helping me because you're steering the conversation exactly where I was hoping it would go. We talked about your past and the harp and some of your accolades and where you are, and I was kind of like trying to hint at creatively, what you want to do per se. It sounds like this trend not transection. This intersection of like spirituality and creativity is super important for you. I was listening to your music last night. I was making notes. I have a Japanese Enzo here with the Japanese characters of Wabi Sabi, which is very much the same principle. And I'm a big believer that imperfection is the perfection, right? Like finding the
Absolutely.
flaws are what makes us beautiful. This is going to sound like such a stupid analogy, but I remember when Daniel Craig became the Bond, and I remember, I think my mom saying like, "Oh, he's so ugly. The body's amazing, but he's not handsome like the previous ones." And I said, "That's what makes him so perfect. Is that he's
Exactly.
not like so classically handsome. He's a little bit more rugged and rough, but he's still got the bod." So I don't know why, but Daniel Craig was like
No, I
my
think that's a
foray
great
into
analogy.
the
Yeah, absolutely,
so
absolutely.
Kuruvinda, and I'm just going to read a note or two here, interpreted as a precious gemstone symbolizing devotion, prosperity, and the divine life force. And then the album itself speaks to the universal human desire for originality, peace, and self acceptance. We're going to get into this, but you said
Mhm,
you had a journey of self love and self acceptance. What was it?
mhm.
Where did that start? How did you do it? What was it that you weren't accepting?
Well, I think that's a very complicated question and a complicated answer. My mother passed away in
I asked.
2023. Yep. And the album that was born out of the grief from her loss was Aquamarine, which was my first Grammy nomination. That particular journey was all about the 5 stages of grief: the denial, the anger, the acceptance, all of those things that every human being has to experience at some point in their life and probably multiple times, right?
Yes, yes.
And so this album was born from the aftermath of that, meaning that I no
Mm,
longer had the filter of my mother's view of me, of who she expected me to be, of who she thought I was, and to actually be my authentic self without that filter, without anyone else's judgment of who I am, and to recognize what those imperfections within myself were that I needed to work on. And so I practice transcendental meditation. This is not necessarily, based on meditation at all. However, I think it informed a lot of the decisions that I made coming into writing this music. A lot of times when I was meditating, I would think about things that would would affect how I would go sit down and write behind my instrument the next time I sat down and wrote behind my instrument. So,
Mhm.
I think there were many things that built an arsenal for this album. But the truth is, it doesn't matter what the imperfections are. It's the experience of identifying them, resolving them, and accepting them. And that's what I hope people take away from this music is not having to tell people what the imperfection is because maybe you don't want to say that. Maybe somebody has a really, personal secret thing that they can't expose. But if they can take that, that three-part series that I just said and apply it to whatever that is for themselves, that's the hope that I have for this music.
Yeah, and that's lovely, and I can see that for sure, and I wanna talk about the music more. I really appreciate your candor. It's, I think so important for us to talk about things that we don't wanna talk about. I had this rule in university that I kinda developed that as soon as I was too tired, apathetic, scared, sad, broke, whatever, to do something, for me, it meant, "Okay, you have to do it." And it was the times that I wanted to do something that I said, "Okay, maybe you should do something else." So thank you
Mhm.
for sharing. I was gonna simply comment, isn't it funny how so much of our identities, regardless of age. I'm 45, I've got children, and I have, ex-wives and parents still, touch wood that I still have my parents, but and I haven't experienced that sense of loss, but I've still had so much loss and grief. I did lose a child. I've had those failed marriages. We tie so much of our identity to other people, and it's
That's
once
right.
that veil drops, we start to see more and more that it has to be just us. And I'm very respectful, even envious of people who were able to identify that at such a young age. I mean, one of my role models, Tupac Shakur, he's like, I can't believe how much wherewithal he had at 26, 25 years old that I'm just developing now 2 decades later than that. Was that the first time you had a huge veil drop and started to see yourself, or did you already have that in other ways along your journey?
I think it was always there along my journey, but I didn't have the tools to understand how to work on them. And it doesn't matter how much therapy you've had in your life. I think you have to identify the ways that work for you to work on yourself, right? Um, and I think again, when you have those exterior filters on you, I feel like it's a little hard to break past that, and I felt stuck.
Mhm.
I felt very stuck, while my mother was still alive, and I loved her dearly, and we were very close, but there were things about her that definitely made me feel that I couldn't be my authentic self. And so,
Mm,
this has really been an extraordinary couple of years for me to finally come into my own and feel, so much healthier and healthier psychologically and spiritually,
yeah,
and not just, physically, although that's also true. But
yeah. So it's very much a renaissance for you, a dawning of a new era, and there's obviously gonna be a
absolutely.
proclivity of musical activity now going forward. What are some of the things that you mentioned therapy? I'm a big fan of therapy as well. In fact, I have therapy later today in 2 hours.
Ah,
Uh, I do it regularly, and I think that therapy comes in different forms. It doesn't have to just be talking with a professional. It can be, with friends, with your buddies at the bar. Like it's so important just to discuss um, gym, yoga, hiking, spirituality with nature, whatever it is. What are some of the things that you do outside of create music?
having community is really important. And so I
Mm,
feel, every morning we have a dog, that's our child. And we've had him for 11 years since he was a puppy. And we take him for a walk every morning to our local park. And we have a community at our dog park that is actually really, really tight. And I look forward to that every day because it starts my day, it sets up my day, it allows me to be with people who I wouldn't necessarily know outside of the fact that we all have dogs and all go to the same park.
Mhm.
But they've become friends and they've become people, we just had pizza night a couple nights ago. It's like these are people that I like being around and we have a lot of fun together. So I think, and I've spoken about the Recording Academy. I think community is so
Yeah,
important in whatever form, whether it be your church, your yoga class, you know, your dog park, whatever it is
yeah,
that you have in your world. Loneliness is the killer in life, right? And the fact that so many people isolate themselves, we learned this during the pandemic that we couldn't see people, we couldn't
yeah.
communicate with people except online, like we're doing right now. And it reduced our ability to be in a healthy community relationship with other people. So I think that's one of the biggest things that I truly concentrate on is nurturing those relationships and making sure that I have um, you know, I have support, but I give them support too, right? So
Mhm.
that's super important to me.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think community, like I mentioned at the top of our call, that we're trying to grow a village, to develop a village here is so
Mhm.
important. It allows people to maybe find comfort or strength or support that they need in order to come out of their shell and maybe share some of the things that are holding them back, weighing them down, however we want to phrase that. And I feel that the more you release everything, the more you let go of your traumas, your the bad things you might have done in life, whatever it is, the more you release it, the lighter you get, the better you feel, the more you realize we're actually all the same and we've all gone through this same arc in some way or shape or form. And then you can do more. You give back more, right? It's the healing journey. Let's talk about the album and end there because I think it really does an incredible job of wrapping up this conversation in terms of the music and your growth
Right.
and then the spirituality and the mindset. Um, I put it on, I think, a week ago for the first time when I first was listening to a couple of the songs, and shame on me, having grown up in a classical household, I had like an idea in my mind of what it would sound like. And there was the little cherub, but then there was also the huge concert hall, and everyone's in tuxedos. And I pressed play and I closed my eyes because I love to listen and not listen, but hear the music. Do you know what I mean? Uh, and instead of all that, I was immediately transported to a massage table and there was candles and incense and I felt super relaxed. And it was not in a cliche kind of way. It was very modern and very mellow. And I said, holy crap, this is incredible. And is not at all what I expected. Does that, sound like your album?
Absolutely, and I think it's really I mean, I'm cracking up as you're explaining this because I think there's such a, cliche about the harp in general, right? It's an ancient instrument, it's a classical instrument. I think, in the last 10 or 15 years, I think that there's been a real renaissance for the harp and it's found its way into modern music. And it's really, taken a shift, I think, with people's perspective of it. However, you never know what to anticipate when you sit down and hear a harp centric new age album, right? And I think, I'm classically trained. So obviously, that knowledge is what informs my composition style.
Hmm.
However, I'm a big fan of Brian Eno and Harold Budd and these characters who have really been the pioneers of new age music and ambient music. I was a
Hmm.
huge fan of George Winston, and in fact, if I can think of one artist that I've really identified with, in my journey of new age music, it's George because he had a more compositional style than perhaps Brian Eno, who
Hmm.
maybe steers more towards that ambient side of the new age ambient, category. But all of that music is what informs mine. And
Hmm.
I sit and I write, and then I go back and I take out things. I extract, because the one thing I want to always have in my music is space. And, my husband, Mark, is the one who is my mix engineer. He is the one who creates the bed of unbelievably beautiful ambient sounds that you hear behind the music, but the harp is always centered in that bed. And I think we do a great job of making sure that it's still classically recorded. It has a high
Uh,
value in terms of the way that it's presented as an acoustic instrument. And then we add the things that surround it to make it that new age sound, you know? Um,
yeah.
this album, I think it does have an arc. It starts out with Shadow Light, which I think is the acceptance of the shadow that we all carry within us. Everyone has a
Uh,
shadow, whether you like it or not. and, and there's a darkness that exists in all of us. And
yeah.
so I started the album with something that shimmered and had, a lightness about it, and then took the journey through the darkness and then came out through the light at the end in Santosa, which
Uh,
literally in Sanskrit means contentment. And so, I feel like the arc of this album is quite easy to follow in a sense, based on the feeling that you get from each of these pieces and whether they resonate with you as to maybe what you need.
yeah, I mean, I can definitely see the arc as far as we got so far, and now that I have the story about, your healing and your mother and all that, you can even feel that it's more palpable within the music. Um,
Mhm.
I I I love that. How do I phrase this? New age has like certain connotations, right? The term new age, for better or worse, can sometimes be seen as hokey and crystals and incense and whatnot. I I don't believe that. I think the new age has had connotations assigned to it, but that's not just necessarily what it means. With your music, I don't even think new age. I think modern, and it's a direct reflection of how you said a classical upbringing, but then working with hip hop artists. It feels like a natural, organic meshing.
Mhm.
Organic being the key word there with what you're doing. Um, and I feel like it would be so suited to have even more electronic influence. I don't know if you ever thought about that before.
Mm.
I genuinely listen to all music. I'm such a music junkie. So, in this regard, chill hop, trip hop, jazz, like lounge music,
Right,
lo-fi,
right.
any of these things, like where there's that electronic element and then maybe jazz or hip hop brought in. I really feel like this album could even be like its own remix, like a remix version, bringing in more of the electronic side and getting that full ambient, organic, chill vibe. That's what I was immediately feeling when I pressed play.
Got it, got it. Yeah, I think that's valid for sure. And one thing is that we don't use any keyboards or electronics in that way on when we mix. These are all vintage and modern outboards that my husband has within his arsenal. So, they're very organic sounds, and nothing is triggered on a keyboard. So, I've that's the way that we've constructed these albums, the last 3 albums that I've released. But I'm not adverse to, I mean, I think every time I write a new album, it has to expand. There has to be something new about it. It can't be the
Mhm.
same as it was the last time. In this particular instance, I think the compositions are different on this album than they were for Aquamarine. Aquamarine was a little simpler.
Yeah.
And also I wanted something that evoked a little bit of the Eastern, I have a lot of Eastern influences for this particular album. I wanted an instrument that reflected that, which is why I decided to collaborate with the Turkish clarinet. And Ratnaraja, which is the second track on the album, was a beautiful collaboration with Ismail Lumanovsky, who is a wonderful clarinetist. He brought a handmade instrument to the studio that had been made from balsam wood by someone in Turkey for him.
Mhm.
And it had such a unique tone, and it really lended that voice that I was looking for. that would separate and make something new, you know, away from just the harp and the strings that I obviously include, on multiple
Mhm.
albums. Um, and I think, they sound great together, the strings and the harp,
Yeah.
and I think those are sometimes the pieces that people, respond to the most. But for me, if I had to pick a favorite song from the album, it would be Ratnaraja for that specific reason.
I mean, you mentioned meditation, or was it transcendental meditation or Buddhist
Yeah.
meditation that you got into? Whereas I can definitely feel the Eastern influence in you personally, which then infused into the music and who you were collabing with. Last question, really, for me right now is so you are as advertised. You're lovely, and thank you for this chat. You have a mission to elevate the harp and to show it as a modern instrument that it obviously can do so much more than what many of us have previously thought of. Emotional evolution and wellness, aligning with the growing cultural shift toward sound healing, contemplation, nervous system restoration. I love that. I absolutely love
Mhm.
that. I think that this is where I want to end, and tell me a bit about that. Like, what is it that this universe is missing right now? What are you doing? How do we bring it back?
Well, there's a lot of chaos in the world. And I think we're always met with ourselves when chaos exists around us of how we're going to react to it. And so for me personally, it means that I have to shut off news. I can't necessarily watch the news cycle 24/7. I don't necessarily
Yeah.
need to know everything that's happening. But I also try to make sure that I'm always curious, and staying curious is, I think, what informs us as we grow older too, and allows us to keep our youthful sense about us. um Never losing that child child's mind, or that curiosity that you have as a child that you start to lose as an adult if you're not careful. Finding joy and being more playful. I think these are all things that I personally have to try to work into and weave into my world on a daily basis. So I think it's finding whatever really resonates with each individual person of how they're going to face their days, and how they're going to put themselves forward in their own world.
Yeah, that's lovely. I like that lesson. I got a visual. I'm going to use the metaphor for anyone watching is pick up your harp, close your eyes, and imagine the 5-year-old that is playing that harp for the first time, and that feeling, that sense of discovery, that sense of, curiosity, and how beautiful life is when you're learning something for the first time. I think that is, for me, how that's the lesson that I'm taking away from this.
That's great.
Uh,
That's great. That's
Kirsten,
beautiful.
I really appreciate your time and your candor. I always like to end by giving my guest the final word. You've already imparted us with so much wisdom, so the world is yours.
Thank you for the world. I love it. My last word, be true to yourself, and always remember that you are a beautiful, imperfect ruby, imperfect gem.